Thank you, Kat. Appreciate the introduction and housekeeping. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have quite the crowd on the webinar this morning, so thank you for being excited about the online manual and coming to learn more about it. For those of you that I have not had a chance to introduce myself, my name is Amber Daugherty. I am the Assistant Division Director for the Central District. I have inherited this initiative that has been in the works for quite some time in the division, but I'm happy to say we are making some substantial progress and really stepping forward with getting this initiative off the ground. So we've spent the last 6 to 9 months really trying to create a structure for this initiative and really make sure that we have a good understanding of how we're going to move from getting this initiative off the ground to publishing a manual that will be user-friendly and will really add value to everyone's daily, their life, their work environment. So we've spent a lot of time really planning on the front end, and now today is kind of the ribbon cutting ceremony for getting this initiative really off of the ground and started. So as some of you are probably aware, we did issue a policy and procedure manual. The procedure was issued a few days ago, and that will become effective July 1st. So that will be kind of our kickoff date for really getting this initiative off the ground. Today is the first official training for the manual, and like Kat said, it will be recorded, so you will be able to reference it later once you actually start developing your content. And then we'll also include the PowerPoint, so you'll also have that to reference at a later time once you get kind of a little bit further down the road with developing your content or just need an overview of what exactly we're trying to accomplish here with the initiative. So let's kind of jump in here. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We are going to cover the main components of the manual. So I want to make sure that everyone that's participating today really walks out of here with a good idea of what the big picture is, what our goals are, what is the purpose of the online manual, and how is it going to make an impact on your work environment. So we'll talk about those different components, try to understand big picture. We're also going to look at that manual procedure that I talked about a minute ago and look at each one of those sections and talk about what the intent is for each one of those sections to help you start to develop some content. We're going to talk about the difference between policy and procedure. So you're going to hear those words really thrown around quite a bit today, and I want to make sure that folks really understand that there is a difference between what is policy and what is the purpose and intent behind drafting the policy versus an actual procedure. So we'll spend some time discussing the differences between those. I also want to talk a little bit about different legal authorities. So knowing that we have a lot of authority that already dictates how we have to complete our jobs, we need to be thinking about what do we already have out there and then what do we need to create. So not everything belongs in the policy and procedure manual. Some things do have to go in other legal authorities to make them a little more sound if we would get any challenges. So we'll talk a little bit about the purpose of each one of these authorities, again, to help you think about how you want to develop content for your team or your section. We'll also talk about the procedure template. So you probably have seen this floating out with a couple that we have piloted in the past. But we do have a procedure template that has 10 different sections that will be used for every procedure that we will create within the manual. So we'll talk about each one of those sections and what we're looking for as you're drafting your content for those. And then lastly, we'll kind of wrap up with just some content development tips, things that I've noticed and learned as we've piloted a couple of the procedures in the past, and things just to kind of help you get started off on the right foot. So understanding the big picture, what are we trying to accomplish and what do I need to be thinking about as I'm developing content for the manual? So first and foremost, the policy and procedure manual is intended to dictate our internal operations. It is not intended to dictate external compliance. And I want to say that again, it is not intended to dictate external compliance. It is very important as we move forward with this process that we really keep that in the back of our minds as we're drafting our language, we're thinking about the perspective that we're writing from when we have our policies and procedures, because there is administrative authority for us to dictate our internal operations through a policy manual. But when we start stepping out and dictating what other folks are supposed to be doing, our contractors or other individuals that we work with, we really need to think about what legal authority is appropriate for dictating that external compliance. So that's why we're going to talk a little bit too later about legal authorities and where some things are better housed than in a policy or procedure manual. But it's very important as we move forward and try to have kind of a clean slate moving forward with creating policy and procedure that we always keep in mind that this is internal direction, not external. All of our guidelines, directives, and some standalone manuals, there will be a very few exceptions, ones that may be incorporated into CSR or that have copyrights on them. We'll have to think about those. But for the most part, all guidelines, directives, and standalone manuals will be retired and incorporated within this policy and procedure manual or moved to the appropriate legal authority. Again, thinking about whether it better belongs in a contract or whether it should be in a code of state regulation, or if it does actually belong in the policy or procedure manual. So with guidelines, I think that's going to be one of our easier ones to transfer over. Those are already drafted to be internal guidance. So with guidelines, I think it's just a matter of reviewing, cleaning them up, and writing them into the procedure template that we have created. Directives are going to be a little bit heavier lift. Those are ones that we have historically used to dictate some external compliance. So we'll have to be careful on how we're changing those into procedures and really consider whether those are covered elsewhere. What I've noticed with a lot of the directives is that we already have the legal authority. So we already have a code of state regulation, or we have a Rizmo, or we have a contract provision that already outlines what the external compliance requirement is, but we are restating it in a directive with additional kind of procedure included with it to let our team members know how they're supposed to implement something that's already stated in a CSR or in contract. So I think, it can be done. You can move a directive over into either policy or procedure. Those ones will just take a little bit additional analysis to make sure that we're doing that appropriately. Again, standalone manuals, I said there will be a few exceptions, but those also, a lot of the standalone manuals, they include a lot of policy and they include a lot of procedure. So with the standalone manuals, I think it's a matter of trying to tease that out. What is actual policy and what should belong in the procedure? And then there's some material in there that's just kind of FYI information for external stakeholders. So then also finding the appropriate home for that as well. So lots of different things to kind of think through as we're looking at all the pieces that we have to pull into the manual, but definitely can be done. And we're going to talk about that today, about how we can transfer some of those different pieces of guidance into the policy and procedure manual. I also want to, state the obvious. It is going to take time to transition from current guidelines and directives. This is not something that we're going to be able to just kind of rush through and throw it into a new procedure template and it's good to go. The procedure template really forces us to think through some complex issues and to really make some decisions about consistency across the division and make sure we're getting all of our legal authority included. So it is going to take some time to work through all of those guidelines and directives. So for some time, we will be working with those as well as transferring things over into the online manual. I'm going to try to make that as easy as possible. One thing that we're doing right now is we are posting any new procedures under the guidelines tab of the internet page so that you aren't having to hunt down a whole nother section. And then as we get additional material for the online manual, we will publish that, and then that will be your more go-to source for this information. And then, of course, just to kind of understand what our end goal is, everyone's goal is to kind of have this one-stop shop where we're able to go understand how we're supposed to do our business and find the answers that we're looking for to be able to do the jobs that we're all here to complete and want to complete. Okay, so keep talking about policy and procedure. What is the difference between the two? Okay, so policy you can kind of think of as, you know, your umbrella for the manual. It is your big picture. It is your overarching philosophy of the organization. It's used to guide our internal decision making. It has our big principles. It is used to set the framework for what will be our procedures. So we have big picture policy, and within that, we're going to have our procedure that tells our team members how to actually implement or perform an action within that policy section. Your policy section is generally going to be pretty static. It's not something that we're probably going to go in and update or revise on a frequent basis because it is the big picture, the overarching ideas of our organization. It's not something that we should be revising very frequently. Also, the thing with policy is it should be something that's easily understood by all team members. So you shouldn't have to be a subject matter expert to be able to pull up a section of our policy manual and have a basic understanding of how things work. So policy is not the place to have a lot of citations to different legal authorities, to use a lot of jargon. It is the place that you're trying to just explain to the reader, here is big picture, high level, what you need to know about this piece of our organization or this piece of our process. I like to kind of think of policy as, you know, sitting down with a colleague who's been here for some time, who has a lot of historical knowledge, and they're just trying to give you the basic idea. They're just having a 5-minute chat to say, hey, here's what you kind of need to know about how we do intake. That is your policy section. That's what we're aiming for with that part of our manual. The procedure then is the step-by-step directions on how to perform a task. That is where you really rely on your subject matter experts to tell us how does this need to be done? How do we complete this particular piece of our job? Procedures are going to be narrowly focused. We don't want to have a procedure that has step-by-step directions on 10 different things. We need to be able to pull that one procedure and say, okay, here's what I need to do, here's how I do it, and then I move on to maybe another relevant procedure. We don't want to encompass everything into a single procedure. So they should be narrowly focused. The procedure should fit into a policy somewhere. And if it doesn't, then we need to be thinking about how we need to revise or add to a policy to make sure that the procedures we're creating do fit into the overall policy of the division. And procedures are also things that should be strictly followed by team members and able to be followed by team members. If you have a procedure that a team member does not feel they can know how to do perform a certain job function from start to finish, then we haven't done our job with the procedure. You should be able to pick it up, understand who it applies to, what situation it applies to, and follow from start to finish those steps that are outlined in that procedure. Okay, so this is the website preview. This is what I've been referring to as the bones of the manual. It is just the table of contents. And this table of contents has been created for some time. It's had tweaks, and it will likely have additional revisions to it. We just needed to kind of start somewhere. I already know some folks have told me this doesn't apply anymore, or we need to update language. So know that this is not set in stone. We can change this. But this is our basic outline of what we're looking at for the policy and procedure manual. This web page right now is not live. Like I said earlier, once we have enough material to justify publishing it and making it live, then we will do that. I have been super impressed with the amount of excitement and momentum that we're already gaining with different procedures and people that are excited to work on this project and have volunteered. So I am hopeful that we will have some substantial content to to get published in the near future. So that's very exciting. For now, though, this is what we're kind of working with to add in some of our material. You'll see here just kind of some basics about what to expect on the web page to help you think through how you may want to develop your content. The main page here will have the table of contents, like I said. It'll be broken down into sections, and then there will be chapters and subsections within those chapters. Okay, each one of these are an accordion, so you'll click and it'll open up. The goal with creating the sections the way that we did was to really try to take you from beginning of services, you know, your first kind of introduction to the division, all the way through monitoring, performance review of the provider. So from start to finish, intake and eligibility to the planning phase, to UR, to all of our different services, and then how do we monitor and do quality review of all of those services. So it really is trying to take you through a sequential order or sequentially through how you may obtain services or work with our division. So as you open up an accordion, let's say I would open up section 2 here, intake and eligibility. This is again going to take you to the table of contents. You will click on whatever section you would like to go to, and then that is going to take you to the policy that is associated with that section of the manual. So for this particular one, I clicked on Chapter 2.3, Eligibility Determination. This language is just draft language. Nobody write this down or say this is accurate. This is just draft language at this point. So you'll click there, and it's going to open up to your policy and then your subsections. What's nice about what we built in is you can click anywhere here on the table of contents, and it's going to open up all of the policy for that section. So let's say I click on eligibility determination. I realize what I'm really trying to get at is something maybe further down here in a subsection. You're going to be able to keep reading until you get to the information that you're really trying to find in that particular chapter. So that's kind of how the table of contents will open up, and then this is your policy. I want to make that clear because I keep getting a lot of questions on that. The policy is the actual text that is on the web page. It's what you're going to read. Your procedure then, which is accompanied by that template, will be embedded under the appropriate policy section or sections. So you'll have a link here, and it'll say procedure 2B. Maybe it's on how to what is this on? Process the application. So maybe you'll click on that, and then that's going to tell the team member how to actually perform the functions of the eligibility determination. Okay, so you'll notice here in the policy example, there is nothing here that dictates how a team member actually performs a function. You're not getting that far into detail or being descriptive on how someone's going to actually perform the action. You're just saying in general, this is how eligibility is determined, and then we'll have our procedures embedded within that area of the policy. Okay, and procedures. So again, this is the template. This is going to be a standalone link that will pull up a PDF, and that's where you really get into the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to create, which is telling our team members how to perform certain actions as needed. So a couple of things with the procedure template. The template does have 10 different sections, and these sections will be included in every procedure. So we've had a few already that, for example, appeal rights does not apply to. There is no appeal right associated with that procedure. If that is the case, you would just say not applicable and move on from the next section. But the expectation is every time we pull up a procedure, we have all 10 of these sections available, and we can view that information. Having an actual template, even though some people may kind of feel like it's rigid, the purpose of having the template is so our team members always have consistency and know where to go for the certain information that they're looking for. So having that comfort of knowing I go to the procedure, I go to this section, and here's where that information should be located if there's something to provide. So having the template, I think, will really help us to think about how we're drafting procedures consistently and give our team members a better resource to actually find the information. Okay, the template right now is available on the intranet, so that's the DMH online site. If you go to, it's DMH Online, Division of Developmental Disabilities, there is a link on that main page that is Policy and Procedure Manual. That's where we're going to include some of our resources for the manual. So you'll have your template there, you'll have a memorandum template, there'll be this PowerPoint presentation, and then any other kind of resource documents that we create to help through this process will be located there as well. We'll also have a copy of each procedure that's created after on or after July 1st. Will be included on the intranet site until we actually publish that internet page, the actual online manual. And then, of course, you'll go to the manual to receive that information. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive into the actual template, because this is where I'm getting a lot of questions and people are excited to start getting some things on paper and utilizing this. So let's talk a little bit about the different sections of the template. So this is your header section. Your effective date is the date that this procedure becomes effective. So even if you have a guideline that previously covered the same material, you wouldn't use that origination date. You're using the effective date. So when are folks supposed to start utilizing this procedure and following these actions? That's your effective date. Procedure title. Keep in mind when you're titling something that not everyone has the same level of knowledge that you do about your subject area, your expertise area. And make the procedure title something that's meaningful. That if I'm scrolling through that policy section, I can know with the title of the procedure that that is something that I need to look at or that is relevant for the issue that I'm working on. Okay, so being mindful about the titles is really important, and especially for anyone who's new or is looking for information that may be outside of your team. We want to make sure those titles are meaningful. Your procedure number and your policy chapter are going to be assigned by either myself or Beth Hershkin. Beth is the executive assistant to the director, and she will be kind of your go-to for any administrative assistance as we're working through the online manual and working to archive some of our final documents. So it'll be Beth or myself that's helping you with the procedure number and the policy chapter to have those assigned. The goal with both of these functions, or both of these fields, I should say, are to give the reader and user of the procedure a heads up of where they may want to look for additional information in the manual. So your procedure number is going to start with the section number that includes the procedure and then a letter. So, for instance, if my procedure is on intake and assessment, I know that that is section 2 of the manual. So the procedure number may be 2C or 2EE, depending on how far down that list we get. So that signifies to me as a user that I would go to the policy chapter or policy section 2, and that would be where my procedure could be found and may have some additional context or other procedures that may be relevant. Same with the policy chapter. That just gets you even more granular. So what is the policy chapter that is relevant for this procedure? Again, gives your reader additional context to look at if they need to, or additional procedures that may be relevant, okay? So there is a rhyme and reason behind these numbers. So I want us to kind of get into that mindset and understand that these could be helpful in finding context for your procedure. Version, if it's a new procedure, that's easy. Version 1, V1 is what this would say. For the ones that we are moving over from a guideline to a guideline or a directive to a procedure, I would go ahead and include the number of revisions that occurred as a guideline or a directive, because I don't want to lose that history. So if you have a guideline that's been revised 5 times, you're now moving it over into the procedure template, that would be version 6, V6. And then what we would like to do is use our SharePoint page to store the historical version of that guideline, so we know here's the changes that we made, and if we ever want to we ever need to refer back to it, we can see changes were made at this time, this were the changes, and this was why. Okay, so that would be your version number. Your procedure owner is going to be what we'll refer to a lot as your subject matter expert or experts. You may see that a procedure is owned by more than one person because it does cross over a team, and it is kind of straddled by 2 different owners. So your subject matter owner or subject matter expert will be the same as your procedure owner. Okay, and then each procedure will be signed by the appropriate division deputy director. So that would be Angie Brenner or Wendy Witzik, or if we had a procedure that had state operated, April Maxwell would be the appropriate signature for there as well. Okay, so let's look at a couple of the sections of the procedure template. So this is the first 3 sections. We have our purpose, scope, and responsibilities. So for the purpose, think about, you're a reader, as a reader, you want to kind of understand what is the why behind this procedure. Why is this necessary? What is the purpose of this procedure? And then also I want to provide my reader with whatever relevant background information they really need to have to be able to understand this procedure. Now, some of the procedures we have posted recently have quite a bit of background information. That's not a bad thing. Some of them are lengthier, some of them are shorter. As we develop more policy, I think your background information will likely get shorter because you'll have a lot of that background information already established in your policy that will be the umbrella for your procedure. But for now, any background information you feel is relevant to include in the procedure to help your reader kind of understand how did we get here, why are we creating this procedure. That is all helpful information, especially as we move through new team members, we move on to different generations. It's very important that we kind of understand what is the purpose of this procedure so folks can understand it and implement it correctly. Your scope. Your scope is just who does this procedure or what activity or type of waiver, depends on what kind of procedure you're drafting, does this apply to. So if there are ones that have exceptions, let's say that this is a procedure that only applies to self-directed services, team members, a self-directed support coordinator, then that's what you would want to include there. If it only applies to one type of waiver, you would include that there, that this procedure only applies to the Partnership for Hope waiver. Okay, so that is just trying to give your reader the parameters for the procedure. Okay, tell them to what circumstances am I supposed to apply this particular procedure. Okay, responsibilities. That is where you're just going to give kind of a heads up of who has main responsibilities in this procedure. So if this is a procedure that has involvement with a regional office director, if it's a support coordinator, then you would have those responsibilities outlined very generally. Big picture here, you're not getting into step by step because you're going to go into your procedure. This is just a heads up to the reader that, hey, these 4 different groups of people have a very important role in this procedure. So you're going to need to look for who am I, does it apply to me, and what way does it apply to me, so that then as I'm reading through the procedure, I know what things I'm trying to look for, and I have that context of what my responsibility is as I move further down into the procedure. Okay, so nutshell, purpose tell me why we created the procedure, give me the context that I need to be able to implement this procedure, tell me what circumstances it applies to with that scope, give me the parameters, and then tell me what I'm going to be responsible for so that I can have that context moving on through the procedure. Okay, I'm not going to go through these because this is going to be posted on our website. I included these just to have so you can go back and look at some different samples that we've created with the ones that we've piloted. I also want to show you here, like I talked about earlier, the links. This one had a lot of historical context that we felt like needed to be included to give context to the reader of what we were actually trying to get at. Over here, the purpose is very small. That procedure was very narrowly tailored. It really is one action, and so the purpose was was minimal for that one. So here are some different examples, just again for you to kind of FYI as you start developing content. Same with scope. Gave you a couple examples here. Depending on what type of procedure you're creating, you may be talking about what waiver program it applies to, or maybe you're talking about the fact that this applies to everyone in the division, and it's that broad. So you'll have different scopes there. Same with responsibilities. So this is just to give you a couple examples of how you might draft that section. So you'll see here that these are pretty short and sweet. Tell me, if I am the division policy manager, what is my role, my basic overall responsibility for this procedure? I want to know that going in so that I can have that context as I'm reading through the procedure. Okay, sections 4 through 6. So we have procedure. That is your meat and potatoes of the procedure, of course. This is your actual action steps. This is where you are telling a team member, start here, move here, next step, next step, next step. You've reached your goal here, okay? So think about kind of those basic procedure or those basic kind of questions. Who are you telling needs to do what? When do they need to do it? Is there a where, a how, a why that needs to be included so they can make decisions? So think about all those basic questions, just like you're writing step-by-step directions, start to finish. Include a process flow chart if you think, or other graphic, if you think that would help your reader. It is not mandatory to include it, only if you think that it would be helpful for a reader to be able to see step-by-step. We've been working a lot with process mapping. For us visual learners, which I am one, I love the process map because to me, it organizes it better in my head. So if you have something like that to teach different learners, I think that's a great thing that you can include as well, but not mandatory at all. And then I just have included a couple just reminders here, which are things we've already talked about. Procedures should be narrowly focused. Describe step-by-step what actions to take. Do not include direction for external stakeholders or contractors. So you need to be thinking through how you're drafting and what perspective you're using as you draft your procedure. I don't think there's anything else I want to talk to you about. I've noticed as we've moved some of the directives, I think moving the directives or even the guidelines, but mostly it's the directives that are lengthier. Moving that over to a procedure, one thing you probably really want to be thinking about is, should this be more than one procedure? So one that I've talked to some other people about recently is the QEP. So knowing that there's kind of different levels and purposes behind the statewide QEP versus a regional. So maybe that's two different procedures instead of trying to draft that into one really mega large procedure. So really think about how narrowly focused you can make the procedure. There is a place that you can reference relevant or correlating procedures. So you can also include that here. So maybe you create, you separate that directive into two procedures. You can reference that here in the References and Tools section. Also think about big picture, what it's going to look like in the manual. they're likely going to be in the same section of that policy manual. So the reader will also be able to see there's 2 or 3 procedures that I may need to actually look at to understand the big picture and how much and all the process within that certain policy section. Okay, references and tools. This is really just kind of a place for you to add in any additional resources that you think are helpful. I don't know that we have to lock down this section very much, because I'm a believer if you have something that's helpful, that if it's on a link maybe to the Medicaid webpage because you think that's really relevant, or you have a table or a graph or some sort of one-pager handout you've created at some point, an additional training, if there's a form, there's a tool. This is kind of the area where you're throwing in all of that information. So anything else that you think is helpful for that reader, that is where that information can be housed. What I would caution folks about doing, though, is that information has to be kept up to date. So you can't just include it there with a link and then not be responsible for making sure that that stays up to date as well. So you want to be mindful of that as you're attaching things or creating any sort of cross-reference, that you're doing checks regularly to make sure that information also stays up to date. Okay, and then legal authority. This is where we're really going to include all of our support and legal backing for whatever our procedure is telling us to do. This is something you guys have regularly kind of done anyway, it looks like, through like your directives and guidelines, so I don't think this is going to be a major change, except I want to challenge you to expand what you're looking at. So we do really good at looking at Code of State Regulations, Rizmo somewhat, the revised statutes in Missouri, we do pretty good at that, but there's a lot of times that we're missing federal regulations that are applicable, or we're missing a door, or we're missing a contract provision. There's lots of links between our contracts and our procedure that we are not linking together. So thinking about those different authorities and making sure that you're really capturing all of the legal authority that applies to your procedure, not just the ones that we're a little more comfortable with or use more frequently. Okay, same thing here, just a couple slides just to show you some differences in different procedure that we have looked at. This one used bullets, this one used letters and Roman numerals, no particular format there. I think it's whatever works for your particular procedure. Some is going to have more subsets and you're going to need more detailed direction, and then some can just be more of a bullet type format because there's not quite, you don't have to quite get as granular as you would in some of these other ones. Okay, this is also an example of just a process map that maybe you would want to link to your procedure. So this is not the procedure itself. A process map is not a procedure. It is a visual to aid you in understanding the procedure. Okay, so what's been helpful for some people is doing the process map first. So as the subject matter expert, you fully understand what your process looks like. And then the goal would be to take this information and then put it into that procedure format where you're going to have more detail. You're going to have all your legal authority. You're going to have all those other pieces that you need for a complete procedure. And then you would link this process map in that references and tools section as an aid for the reader. So then you have that information to also pull from once someone becomes more familiar with your procedure, then maybe they can just move to this process map to kind of have that quick visual reminder of what all they need to do. Okay, references and tools, again, just some examples to show you what folks have used as a tool. This one points you to an external website to learn more information. It also gives you to a form. This one talked about related DD procedures, so just kind of gives you a heads up that you also may want to look here if you are in this procedure and have additional questions. Billing authorization requirements, anything as a subject matter expert that you think the reader would benefit from having you throw into that references and tools section. And then legal authority. Again, what I would challenge you here is think beyond your Code of State Regulations in your Rizmo. Think about your contract. Think about waiver manual, application, other guidelines, anything that you can kind of think of. Here's your contract provision or your TCM contract over here, or manual. Anything that you can think of to point the reader in the right direction is what you want to do here for the legal authority for that section. Okay, monitoring and timelines. Okay, so this is 7 and 8. Monitoring is the place where you can include information on how we're going to monitor this procedure. So if there is a report maybe that is going to be pulled quarterly or annually that will kind of look at the success of the procedure or whether it's being followed by the appropriate team members, that's kind of the section where you're going to add in those monitoring pieces. Maybe you already have something built in that we're looking at. This is just a place to kind of identify how you're going to have any oversight over the procedure. It's important that as we draft and create additional procedure, that we don't just create procedure and have zero look back at that procedure. I mean, we want to be realistic with it. We don't want to overburden ourselves with too much look back and too much oversight, but we also need to recognize that if we're going to put expectations in place, there does need to be some sort of oversight of that process to the extent that it makes sense and it's realistic. It's important to think about that piece as a lead of your team, as a subject matter expert. As you're creating this procedure, what is your process to kind of make sure the checks, to make sure that everything's going smoothly? What's your checks and balances kind of system that you put in place for your procedure? This may be an area that is not applicable to you, so that would be what you would include here if you don't have any monitoring mechanisms. But think about that as you're drafting your procedure, if there needs to be something here, or if you already have something. And then timelines. This is something that we felt critical to pull out because a lot of times, even though you kind of know the procedure, the timelines don't always stick with you. And so having a quick place to go, a quick reference to say, okay, I know what I have to do, but when do I have to do it by? I can go to this timeline section and I find my most critical timelines. I know, okay, I have to have that packet completed and turned around in 5 business days. This is where I explain any nuances about those days. Is it working days, business days? Is there an exception? Okay, that's your timeline section of your procedure. It's your quick snapshot of any timelines that are applicable to that particular procedure. Examples for you guys to look at later. Okay, same with timelines, different examples. Okay, and then section 9 and 10, appeal rights and definitions. Appeal rights is one of the things that we felt important to include because it does have a lot of consequence if we don't follow the appeal rights. So we wanted to make sure those were actually pulled out and those were, that team members were on notice that when you perform this procedure, there may be an appeal right that's attached to that. And so we need to make sure, one, that we're following our procedure very closely and to the T, but 2, that there may be additional action triggered once you perform the actions of this procedure. So this is just a place to really kind of highlight that information. And if it does not apply to your procedure, which it's not going to apply to a lot of them, you would simply write not applicable in this section and move on. You would not delete the section, you would just include not applicable. Okay, and then 10, definitions. Define things here as you can. I'm going to try to be careful about having consistent definitions. That's one thing that I'll be looking at. So if we have regularly used terms, like MMAC is one that's coming to mind. I have a definition that we've created for that based on the MMAC webpage. So that will be some standard definitions that we'll use. And then also, if you have just a ton of acronyms, if someone who's not a subject matter expert does not know what these acronyms mean, MMAC, again, is another one that's kind of coming to mind. If you can, spell out the acronym and then also give a definition for that acronym. That would be helpful too. Okay. Okay, give you a couple examples here. Don't need to go through those. You guys can take some time to look at those later as you feel you need to. Okay, let's talk about the procedure for just a minute that was just published. So that was effective July 1st, or will be effective, July 1st. It was sent out to you all with a memo attached, kind of explaining what the purpose of the procedure was, the effective date, and then some of the critical components of that procedure. So I'm not going to go through that procedure word for word. If you have questions about anything that's included in there, feel free to throw those in the chat, and I will answer those more in depth afterwards. But just some key components to kind of keep in mind. You'll notice that in the procedure, there are key team member roles. Subject matter experts is one that we keep throwing around, so I just want to make sure folks understand that. A subject matter expert may be the lead of a team. It may be someone on a team who has just been assigned to be the expert in that situation. So maybe there's just a smaller subset of an overall team's mission, and they have one person on their team who has been designated to be the go-to person for that particular issue. They may be the subject matter expert. It may be someone from the executive team. It may be someone from a regional office who has a lot of historical knowledge that loves that area of our organization and has been designated as a subject matter expert. So point being, there will be lots of different people that will be your subject matter experts as we're trying to really broaden who participates in the creation of our online manual. You're going to see, I think, that subject matter expert list really kind of grow and blossom as we try to cross-train more and build up other team members to really kind of be experts in different areas. Knowing that our system is so complex, we need all the experts that we can get in certain areas and nuances of what we do. Other things to tell you about team member roles, policy manager is mentioned in the procedure as well. That is myself. So I will be responsible for kind of overall organization, training, and can be your go-to person. If you're just needing help getting started off the ground, I can help you with those things. I told you Beth Hirschkin is going to be the administrative assistant that is kind of helping us with some of those key administrative roles. What else about team member roles? The division director is going to be the last say over all policy that's created. Remember, that's our big overarching principles, our kind of strategic direction, our philosophy of the organization. So that will, final decisions will rest with Jess for those decisions. And then our procedure, which is our more day-to-day operations, tell us how to do something. Those final decisions for procedures will rest with our division directors, deputy division directors, depending on what section it's in. So if it would be a Wendy section, an Angie Brenner, or even a April Maxwell, then that's kind of how that will spread across and share responsibilities there. Otherwise, everyone should kind of know that they have a role to play in the policy and procedure manual. So everyone is responsible for taking initiative to be a part of the policy and procedures that are being created. Everything is going to be published for team member comment for no less than 30 calendar days. So take advantage. If you're a team member who's implementing the policy, if you have folks under you that you need to understand how to train on a certain procedure, make sure you're getting involved. Take the time to try to make it a priority that you review all the policy and procedure that's being implemented. And know that you have the power to also propose policy and procedure. So within that procedure 1A, it'll outline how to propose to a subject matter expert, inclusion of certain information or clarification, and then there's a process for that to be reviewed. Now, I did get a question that I want to talk about for just a second here. I'm doing okay on time. One of the questions that was brought up was kind of why have this process for proposing, consideration, you get an answer, yes or no, should we include it? And the simple answer for that is not because people don't have great ideas, and there's not things that we shouldn't include, because there's lots of things we should include. There's lots of ways we could enhance our process and make things better. But the simple fact is we don't have all the resources and people that we need to be able to do everything that we want to do. So part of having that process in place of kind of making the proposal, having it considered, is about prioritizing what we're doing and making sure that we're using our time and resources effectively and where we're going to have the most value. So know that if you're someone who's making a comment on a policy or procedure, or you're proposing something, and if it's not taken up right away, just know that things have to be prioritized, or we may already have something in the works, or we don't think we can expend time on that right now. Those things can still be kept on a list for future consideration, but if something does not get taken up or accepted in a policy or procedure, do not be discouraged in requesting or proposing other things or participating in later procedure comment periods. Just know that it's really about prioritizing what we can and can't do, knowing that we do not have infinite resources. Okay, so talked about how to propose and develop policy. Just know that that's in there. So if you're interested in that, there is some steps on how to do that. The procedure template and the memorandum template are both linked in that procedure. So if you want to, you can also get to them there. They'll also be linked on the intranet site on DMH Online. You can find those templates as well. And then monitoring expectations and timeline expectations are also included within that procedure. So I want to make clear that as we're trying to move forward with having more consistency, working across the aisle, a broader kind of team view, there are some expectations around who is responsible for training on a certain procedure, making sure that people have the right information to do their job appropriately. Looking at what do we do if folks are consistently not following a procedure and it's causing ripple effects and hiccups through our daily activities. So you'll have some monitoring expectations that are out there that you'll want to review, and then timeline expectations as well, as far as publishing, posting for comment, and then issuing that memo that I've referred to, and I'm going to actually talk about next. So I will just transition into that. Okay, so memo. A memo is going to be attached with, or issued, I should say, with every revised procedure or policy. Now, I say every. If it's like we have to update, I don't know, maybe we found a spelling error or something that would not be considered an actual content error, then you're not going to get a memo if it's just a spelling error or something like that. But for the most part, you should receive a memo for anything that actually changes the content of the policy or procedure. It may be that the memo is, we updated this number because, I don't know, something changed with the waiver manual or the fiscal year. And if it's something that, even though it may be somewhat minor, but it has an impact on how we conduct business, a memo needs to be attached. I would expect that to be a one-paragraph memo. But it is something that we're trying to really make sure that we include. There's lots of reasons for doing the memo, okay? Memo, one benefit is it puts you on notice. Something has changed. It's going to give you the critical highlights of what has changed or what has been created. The other big part about the memo, the big benefit to the memo, is it's going to give us a historical view that we can archive in that SharePoint page that I referenced, why we made the changes that we made, okay? There are so many conversations that I've been involved in that we're trying to figure out why we changed something 10 years ago, and we have nothing to go to except the team members who we keep having to go, the same team members we keep having to go back to say, why did we change this? What was the purpose? Do we need to consider that now? So having a memo that goes along with that revision will try to plug that gap and try to create that knowledge, that historical archive that we can go back to and say, okay, we changed this 10 years ago, here's the reason. It's laid out in this memo and will give us a little bit of context, okay? So keeping that in mind, I'm telling you the purpose of the memo to keep in mind what you want to include, okay, or to try to help you know what to include. So of course you're gonna say who, you know, your to, your from, date, subject of your memo. Start out with why. That is, to me, is probably the most critical part of the memo. Why are we making this change? Why are we creating this procedure? Give some context. If it's because something has changed in the law, if it's because something has been updated, if it's because we realized something didn't work and we're changing it because of X, Y, and Z, say that. Say what the why is behind the change in policy and procedure, policy or procedure. It also gives our team members some comfort to know that we're not just changing things to change things, that there is a reason behind why we're making them learn something new or change practice. That why is very, very important. You need to tell them when. So your memo can be issued before your procedure goes into effect, or it can be issued at the same time, simultaneously with your procedure. There's some benefits to do it either way. If you want to give people a heads up, hey, this is coming, know that we're going to make a change, you may want to consider issuing your memo a week before, 2 weeks before you actually implement your new procedure. It gives folks in the field, it gives team leads, it gives regional office directors time to prepare. I need to make a note that at my next team meeting, I need to make sure we understand that this procedure is changing. Here's what we're expecting the changes to be. How are we going to implement it? What do we need to do different? So giving some lead time to the individuals that are responsible for kind of doing some of that rollout and that training and introducing new procedures can be a real benefit. So that's one reason why you may want to issue a memo ahead of time. Either way, if you do it ahead of time or at the same time of making the procedure effective, it has to be at minimum issued at the day, on the same day that the procedure is effective. We would never issue a memo after a procedure became effective because that would just be pointless, okay? So it should be before or at the same time. Tell them what they need to pay attention to. Now, so far with the ones that I've drafted, I've always put in there, hey, this isn't everything. You need to read the whole procedure, but here are the critical parts that you need to know. Again, that puts people on notice. Here are the critical changes so I can start preparing my team. And it also gives them that heads up before they jump into the entire procedure. Here are the 4 things I care about because they're going to impact my position or my team. Here are the things I'm looking for as I'm reading the new procedure. So give them some of those cliff notes. And then for folks that aren't maybe in the weeds, or maybe they don't work with that particular issue, but need to have a general understanding of what we're doing, those bullet points also help for those team members as well that just need to kind of have the cliff note version of what we're doing. And then, of course, you always want to end your memo with a contact person. So here would be your procedure owner or owners or your subject matter expert. I could see a couple examples. Maybe it would be someone different than maybe who drafted it, but otherwise that should be kind of the rule of thumb. Who is the contact person for any questions regarding the changes or procedure? Okay, again, template's there. It's a very easy template. It's essentially our letterhead, just something for you to pull up to, from, date, subject. Pretty self-explanatory, okay? Okay, so where do I start? This all sounds great, awesome. It'll be super when it's done, But as a team lead, as someone in the field that's helping with developing procedure, a subject matter expert, where the heck do I start with all of this? So, you know, there's no right answer here. There's some things that I would encourage you to consider. What are you currently working on? Is there something that you know needs to be revised? Do you have something, a new process that's coming that you're trying to work on? Do you need a procedure to plan for connection? This is a big one. Even though connection is going to make life easier in some ways, we still have to have a procedure to understand how that's going to work. It's not going to do the work necessarily for us. There still has to be actions that we're following to understand how the procedure works, even if it's performed in connection and that kind of helps us electronically. We still have to have a procedure. So thinking about how you're planning for connection. Do you need a procedure that has helped with organization efficiency? So now as we're kind of taking a look at some of our regular process and we're trying to make things consistent, do we need a procedure now to really solidify what our expectations are for that particular process or action? Is there something your team is struggling with? They're begging you for a procedure. That's always a good place to start. Those are going to have maximum value and impact for your teams. So those are also good ones to start with. So think about kind of what you have in the works. Know that your time is not infinite. You need to prioritize. Pick something that's going to have maximum value for your time spent. And then once you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, evaluate what you have. This is very important, and sometimes I think this is a step that maybe we kind of gloss over. We get really excited. We're like, oh, we need to fix this. We need to create a procedure for this. It's a pain point. We want to do this. And then we totally blank out on the fact that we have all these other things that are floating out there. And we start down this path to draft a procedure, and then something comes up, some historical document comes up. We realize that we already mentioned it in a guideline or directive somewhere. I am guilty of this. This is why I have this in here. We have language, or we have documents everywhere out there. Take the time, take a breath to really figure out what do you have out there that's going to dictate what you're doing. So, regulations, Rizmos, look at your contract provisions. Is there something in guideline, directive? We have some draft policy sections that are floating out there. See if that is going to help with what you're wanting to do. Other handouts, flow charts. Do we have it in a standalone manual? Do we have it in this place, that place, this place, that place? Because that is true for a lot of the things that we do. We have it in multiple sources. So really spend some time getting your hands around what do you actually have and how can all of that jive together before you just kind of jump into creating something. Okay, then once you have all of that, kind of your hands around it, then the next logical question is this even appropriate for the policy and procedure manual? So if what I'm trying to do is already outlined in a regulation, or we already have it in contract, we need to take a breath and think about, okay, is this something then that needs to be further defined in the policy and procedure manual, or do we already have it somewhere? And then also think about this is internal guidance. This is not to dictate external compliance. So once I've figured out what I want to do, I evaluate what I have. Is it something that actually belongs in the manual because it's internal guidance that we need to further clarify direction for? Okay. Which gets us to other legal authorities. So this is kind of just a crash course in different legal authorities that you want to think about and consider as you're developing policy and procedure. So kind of try to put these in hierarchy, though you really can't, because it depends on, if the language, depends on the actual, how the language is actually drafted, if it's mandatory, discretionary, if it conflicts. So know that this is sort of the hierarchy, but it's not set in stone. So you have your United States Code, so that is, of course, the laws that are created by Congress. Then under that, we have our Code of Federal Regulations. This is a section, the Code of Federal Regulations, That is regulations, rules, you might call them, that are created by federal administrative agency. Okay, so equivalent to our Code of State Regulations, but on the federal level. This is an area that it seems like we kind of routinely skip over. We don't, if you're in it, you pay attention to it, but for a lot of us, we may not realize that there's this other set of laws, federal laws, that we also have to comply with. So big ones, of course, are Health and Human Services, CMS, all of your HIPAA regulations, your Office of Inspector General, those are all federal regulations. So know that, you have federal rules that also you must comply with as a state agency to receive federal funds. Okay, Revised Statutes of Missouri, you guys are familiar with those, also referred to as Rizmo. Code of State Regulations. This is where as an agency, as a division, this is our highest level of legal authority. So this is where best practice would be to include most of your external direction. And I say most because everything has to be in a Code of State Regulation. But if you're pushing an external stakeholder to do something, to want to make them comply with something, it needs to go through the state rulemaking process, okay? That's how we have solid footing to enforce something that we're asking them to do. It gives the external stakeholders an opportunity to comment. It goes to the governor's office to ensure that we have the blessing of the, our technical boss, right, or the governor in his office as an administrative agency, that he agrees with what our regulations are. It talks about, you have to look at costs of implementing the regulations. So this is really the highest level of legal authority that as a division we could really embrace and use as our external compliance mechanism, okay? Division of DD Waiver Manual, want to note that this is incorporated into a regulation. Sometimes I think there's, people get confused. It's a manual, it's not really a law, but this manual is incorporated into a regulation, therefore it is part of a regulation, it's treated just like a regulation, okay? This is something we can consider also incorporating different types of a manual if we have something that's like copyrighted. We can't get away from those very, very unique situations where we can think about incorporating that into a regulation as well. From there, we have the Department Operating Regulation, or DOR. These are available on our internet site. What a lot of people don't know is that a DOR actually is created by law. So we were given, the Department of Mental Health was given legal authority to create Department of Operating Regulations, statutory authority to do so. So they do carry the same weight as law. They can only be used for internal guidance, though. And historically, the department seems to have only used them if it's something that is really department-wide. So it's going to cross over both divisions of the department is where you really start to see use of a DOR. I don't know if that's a hard and fast rule. That's just something that I've observed of past practice. Okay, executive orders. Obviously, these are issued by the governor, and we do have to comply as part of his, the executive branch. We have to follow any executive orders that are issued by the governor's office. And then also keep in mind that we have contract. And there's been some debate, in the past of how much power does a contract provision have or it doesn't have. There is such thing as contract law. Okay, so they do carry the weight of law. Where we get ourselves in trouble is as an administrative agency, we also have regulatory power that I talked about, the Code of State Regulations. Technically, anything that is broad-reaching has uniform effect across our stakeholders should be in a Code of State Regulation to give them fair opportunity to review, comment. We look at cost, all those things I just described. If it has uniform application, it should go through Code of State Regulations. However, we are a unique department in that we provide a lot of our services through contract. So we are still going to have contract provisions. Contract is something that when you're drafting the contract provisions, what belongs in a contract is how you're going to implement that contract. What are the expectations of the contract? How is the contractor going to fulfill their obligations under the contract? How is DMH going to fulfill their obligations under the contract? Those are the things that belong in contract provisions. A CSR is more for the actual procedure. We want to tell you exactly how to do something. External stakeholder, contractor, whoever you are, we want to tell you exactly how to do it. That belongs in the Code of State Regulations. We're going to tell you exactly how to do it, and it's going to apply broadly across lots of different people, okay? That line is blurred a lot. It's gray. The point of this conversation really that I want you guys to take away is that contract and CSR are our best legal authorities to dictate external compliance. And so we need to make sure that we're actually utilizing those appropriately as we try to get away from directives and move into a policy and procedure manual. I can talk more about that as issues and questions come up, but I think we'll just leave it kind of there for this particular presentation. Okay, so preparation tips. What are some things that you might want to think about before you kind of dive into this process? Think about the application that you want to use. So we do have, like I said, a SharePoint page that has been set up with all of the table of contents for what we think the online manual structure is going to look like at this point. If you have a lead or just one or two of you that are going to be working mainly on a procedure, we can give you access to your folder in the shared drive. When I say folder, I mean your relevant policy section and chapter. And you are welcome to collaborate on your documents in that in SharePoint if you would like to do that. Also, some of you are using shared drive. That works. Other collaboration tools. I know some of you are fancy and have some other things that you like to use. That's great too. And then, of course, there's email. And I put email at the bottom because email is really not the best application to use when you're trying to draft a procedure. You get comments everywhere. You don't have any historical drafts to see how things are kind of progressing. So I would encourage you to use one of the other applications, but some of that's going to depend on how many people do you have actually looking at it, what works for your team, because that's your standard practice. And know that I also want to tell you the SharePoint is an option as well if you would like to utilize that to do your draft. Okay, think about your content developers. So you may already have a team that you work with. Start there. You may want to create a new work group. Point being, as you're identifying your developers, you want different perspectives. This is one thing I think we've kind of got ourselves hung up on in the past. When I say different perspectives, that means different teams that may be impacted. It means different regions. It means across the state. It means the people actually doing the work should have a say in how it's rolling out and what those steps are. And it means your executive team should have a perspective because they have, they have to answer for kind of the big ideas and what we're working with and how that fits into the strategic plan. So you need different perspectives to really make a solid procedure. Also think about if you have key reviewers, okay? So yes, you want different perspectives. You need to have a good work group or a good group of people, but you also know that the procedure you're working on is really going to have the most impact on these select people or this select group of people or this team. Giving them a heads up and letting them maybe review prior to the big department review is probably a good idea. It's just going to save you from a lot of heartache later. Like one I worked on, I sent to FPU first to make sure that we were on the same page before ever introducing it to a wider group and doing full comment. So think about if you have some key reviewers that you want to work with first before issuing to a division-wide comment period. Focus your energy. This probably sounds very overwhelming for some of you right now and thinking about all the different pieces, but focus on one piece at a time. Some of these are going to come together easier, some are going to be harder, but try to narrow your focus in on this is what I'm working on right now, this is the procedure I'm working on, or this issue that I'm trying to solve. So focusing your energy to the best of your ability is helpful. Suggest maybe developing a legal crosswalk. And when I say that, all that is an Excel spreadsheet. I have created a template that I will update to the intranet site, but it's just a crosswalk that says, here's my CSRs that are applicable. I have an MOU that talks about this. I have a federal regulation. I have this manual. I have this, I have that. It's just a crosswalk so that as you're developing your content, you're always keeping in your mind, these are the things I need to circle back and review before I actually publish this to make sure that we haven't changed the language so much or we haven't strayed away from something that now we're butting up against legal authority or we're drafting something that conflicts with some of our other legal authority. So knowing your content is important. Familiarize yourself with the procedure template. Create a skeleton procedure to get you started. One thing that's helped me is if I think that something needs to be procedure, I get out that template. I literally just do kind of bullet points. And if I feel like I'm having to really force it, I take a step back and say, okay, maybe this isn't the right place for this. But if it comes together fairly easy and I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, there's a lot more work to do, but it seems to be working, then that might be something, a good sign that you're on the right track with the procedure. And then encourage you as much as you can, reserve time to work and set a finish line. You cannot capture every hypothetical in a procedure. You cannot. There's going to be gray. There's going to be things that will not be answered in the procedure because it's that unicorn, it's that one-off situation, it's the big, giant issue you cannot solve. So those are going to have to be looked at as they come up. So really focus on, as you're drafting your procedure, what is the 95% circumstance that comes up? If your procedure captures that, you're doing well. It doesn't have to capture every hypothetical that will ever come up. It is impossible, so do not drive yourself crazy. Reserve some time to work on it, set a finish line, and know that sometimes you have to let it go. And it's going to be revised and tweaked in the future, and that's okay. But if you are capturing most of what we do, then you are doing better than having nothing at all. Okay, and with that, I'm going to leave you with just some motivational tips because I know this is a lot, and it probably sounds exhausting and tiring and impossible, but some things I have told myself as I'm working on some of this over the last couple of months. Avoid the weeds, okay? So again, you can't get every hypothetical. Don't get so bogged down in the nuance and the minutia that you just give up or throw your hands up, or it can't ever get anywhere because you're so busy trying to figure out those weird type one-off situations. On the same token, acknowledge that there may be some tall grass to get through. There is a lot of things floating out there. We have a lot of different resources. We have things that conflict. People are not doing things consistently. So know that it is a big job to try to create a procedure that gets all of these different teams and all of these different regions onto the same page. It's likely not going to be a straight shot through, super easy. So acknowledge that it is going to be a little bit painful. Know that it is not personal, but it is likely going to take some time. So give yourself built-in time to get through all those kind of hurdles and hiccups. Anything is better than nothing. I kind of just touched on that. Getting something in writing is always better than just saying it's too hard or I can't figure it out, so I'm not going to do anything. It does get easier. Even on the couple that we've piloted, we've kind of identified some things that we would do differently and different people we should have talked to more or thought about. So I think as you do it more, it will get easier. You'll get used to that template. You'll get kind of the big picture in your head. And when you feel like just not doing it, remember that spending time putting it in writing now is better than skimming through a decade's worth of emails to refresh on how to do something. This is so true, and know that if you just put it in writing, even if it's a short procedure and it's not perfect, it doesn't have every scenario, it's way better than trying to look through all of those historical emails to figure out what you landed on 5 years ago. Okay, and if you need the feel good, your team members now and in the future will thank you. If we can start putting things more in writing, get on the same page, it will make our jobs less stressful, it'll free up some time, and next generations will definitely appreciate all the wisdom that is in the division that we need to make sure that we're passing on to future generations to be able to pick up this super complex job and know how to get around the division. So with that, that is your policy and procedure manual first training. Thank you for hanging with me. And I think that's it for me. So Kat, I am done. Thanks all. Have a good day.
One last thing before everybody gets off. I misspoke earlier and I put it in the chat. This is going to be on the intranet, not the internet webinar site, like I had said before. So again, this is going to be on the intranet, and I did put that in the chat in 2 different spots where you can find that. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Again, this is going to be posted on the intranet. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat.